Good evening. Can you hear me? I was told both by Andrea and Isabel that I have only 7 minutes to perform, and then I began thinking even my wife gives me more time than that. I'd like to dedicate the talk tonight, my talk, to Max Prager, a friend of mine who died this past Saturday at the age of 96. He died back in what I call the old country, New Jersey. Max wrote a book entitled Attitude and Gratitude, and that's pretty much what my talk is about. I bet you all remember where you were on 9/11 when you heard the horrible news about the World Trade Center. And I bet most of you know exactly where you were when John F. Kennedy was assassinated. But I doubt you remember where you were Thursday night, December 11th, 2008. I sure do. I'd like to forget it. I was driving on the George Washington Bridge, listening to the radio when the announcer broadcast that Bernard L. Madoff, former head of the NASDAQ Stock Exchange, had been arrested for his role in a $50 billion Ponzi scheme. I immediately had an empty feeling in the pit of my stomach. I turned off the radio and called my wife. Turn on the news. I think we just lost $5 million. Just imagine, if you possibly can, that in one single instant you lose a good chunk of your net worth. 40 years of hard work flushed down the toilet. And you know you're never going to get it all back, no matter how hard you work, no matter for how many years. For the first few days, I was in shock. I didn't know what to do. A friend of mine who worked for the Wall Street Journal urged me to go public with my story, and I was conflicted. I didn't want to be the poster child for Madoff investors, but something told me getting it off my chest would help. The reporter interviewed me for hours and kept referring to me as a Madoff victim. I winced. That's when something went off in my head. I don't like thinking of myself as a victim. I had polio when I was 7 years old, and I never once thought of myself as a victim. I never once said, why me? Why not me? To think of myself as a victim is the same as seeing myself as a leaf being blown by the wind, a passive thing with no control over my own life. And so I told the reporter how I felt, that I was blessed in so many ways with a loving wife and 2 loving children, that I was vital and could continue to work which has never been a 4-letter word in my vocabulary, that I had enough money to keep my home and to put food on my table, that I was a survivor, not a victim, and I wouldn't trade places with Madoff for all his yachts and jet planes. The article appeared on the front page of the weekend edition of the Wall Street Journal, and I was bombarded with supportive calls and emails from friends and strangers alike. I heard from my childhood next-door neighbor, whom I hadn't been in touch with for over 50 years. I heard from high school classmates and a college roommate. I even heard from my ex-wife, whom I hadn't spoken to in decades, and no, she wasn't offering to return the alimony. I even got a phone call from a complete stranger who wanted me and my wife to be his guests at a luxury resort he owned. There are so many good people out there. The outpouring of human kindness was life-sustaining. I appeared on Fox Business News and was quoted in People magazine and as far away as the Daily Express in London. I realized that the more I spoke about the scam, the easier it was for me to deal with its consequences. I had found a coping mechanism and recognized it was the same mechanism I had used my entire life. By sharing my emotions, I gave people the opportunity to support me. Had I been silent, nobody would have known or cared. In a way, it's a little bit like having cancer and keeping it a secret from your friends. They can't be there for you then, and wouldn't you want to be there for them if the roles were reversed? Sharing the experience wasn't enough for me. I needed to take some responsibility for what happened. A good friend of mine, literally one of the country's wealthiest individuals, thought he was doing me a favor by getting me to invest with Madoff. He actually had to pull strings to get me into this exclusive club. But I didn't do my homework. I really didn't understand how Madoff made his money. Nobody else did either, but that shouldn't have been a good enough reason for my investing with him. And by the way, my friend is still my friend. And finally, I made a conscious decision not to be angry. I certainly understand that people had every right in the world to be angry at Madoff and at the SEC, which failed to do its job. Many of the investors were people in their 80s, and they lost everything. But anger wasn't going to work for me. An author once wrote that being angry is like taking poison and expecting the other person to die. All anger was going to do was to eat me alive, and I wasn't about to let that happen. I remember being in the Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer shortly after they put Madoff behind bars for the rest of his life. All Wolf wanted me to do was to blast the SEC, but I wanted to express my appreciation to the United States Attorney, the federal judge, and the FBI, all of whom had done their jobs perfectly. I guess it all boils down to what Max Prager wrote about, attitude and gratitude. Even though I grew up as a Brooklyn Dodger fan before they deserted me and broke my heart by moving here, I always admired the Hall of Famer Lou Gehrig of the New York Yankees. This class act of a guy was struck down in his 30s by the disease which carries his name. I'm less than 30 seconds, you don't need it. He stood at home, played at Yankee Stadium one last time, and declared himself the luckiest man on the face of the earth. If Gehrig, about to die a horrible death, was able to express appreciation, who am I to be any less appreciative for what I have? Some people may believe the lyric in the musical Cabaret, money makes the world go round. But for me, I'll take human kindness any time. Thank you.